All right, we're back again with the Topwater Podcast. We're going to do a recap of the August KBF Challenge Series. Let's get into it. Okay, so we're back again, and we're doing another recap on the another recap of the KBF Challenge Series that I was in. I keep entering into these tournaments, and I think it's beneficial to actually enter into these tournaments, just because if you really want to apply yourself in ways that you don't necessarily think that you can apply yourself in, it's good to do these just because it challenges yourself. You know, it makes you have more of a practical sense when you're out there actually bass fishing, other than just going out and fishing for fun. Now, I'm not saying that actually going out and fishing for fun is a bad thing, and actually, if you're one of those people who just loves to go out and to go fishing and to just have fun and, you know, just enjoy the outdoors and relax and, you know, just really to make it to where you are having fun, you know, just to go out and have fun. I mean, that's how I first started fishing, is just going out and having fun. I mean, other than like back in the day, whenever I was a kid, my dad would take us out to like some farm ponds out in Kansas and stuff. We would go up and visit family, and, you know, we would have permission on ponds and other places like that, and we would go out and fish. Most of the time when we did that, we actually just kept the fish and, you know, ate them. But these were also farm ponds, you know, so you kind of need to make sure you're culling out bass and make sure that you are catching fish out of those ponds, because there's only a finite amount of resources in those ponds. And if you want the pond to stay healthy, you actually have to pull fish out, because once a pond becomes overpopulated with a certain type of fish, it just, that fish just takes over. And then, especially if it's bass, they'll actually start just cannibalizing themselves. I don't know if bluegill necessarily do the same thing, because bluegill typically have smaller mouths, but I'm pretty sure that they would eat like the fry and other, you know, anything that they could actually get into their mouth. But I know bass for sure will actually start just cannibalizing themselves, and then they all end up being a very, very small size. So you'll get this sort of like cookie cutter, like 1 pound bass constantly, and you won't ever really get any bigger bass. So it's good to actually pull bass out and actually cull bass and to actually manage those ponds just to keep them healthy. But, you know, getting back into fishing as an adult, I really just went bank fishing and just tried to figure out, you know, where I could fish, how I could fish, you know, and just to go as often as I could. And I'd usually just go out there to, you know, just have some fun, just, you know, have a little bit of time, you know, to myself outside the house, you know. So it was kind of like a getaway, and it was kind of like an adventure too, especially when you're bank fishing. And if you're bank fishing like a lake, you can end up hiking a few miles. Like I think there was one day I went out and I was fishing, and I think I had to hike, let's see, I think it was a little over a mile. I think it was like a mile and a half or a mile. It was either a mile and a quarter or a mile and a half of just straight hiking to get to one spot. And because of that, and it might have been more than that, It could have been more than that, but I'm pretty sure it was about 1.5 mile and a quarter. But just to catch one fish, just to get to a spot to catch one fish, and then you have to walk all the way back. It can be a task, and it was kind of fun because you get to walk. You're walking through the woods, and just to get to a spot. It's not necessarily like whenever you go to a lake when you have a kayak or a boat or something like that. Even in a kayak or boat, you're actually able to fish more of the water, and you're actually able to fish quite a bit more, actually. I mean, even in a kayak, compared to bank fishing, you can fish quite a bit more. And you can fish offshore structure, you can fish in spots to where you couldn't get to on the bank, or fish spots, because there's a few spots to where you really do need some sort of watercraft or something like that, because especially when you start running into private land and you're starting running into actual obstacles like cliffs and big rocks, and when I say big rocks, I mean boulders, and just places that you really can't go without having some sort of like specialized rappelling gear or anything like that. I mean, you would literally have to have specialty equipment. But so after kind of doing all that for fun, I had the idea, well, I probably have, because I was watching a lot of YouTube videos and vlog style videos, and it's like, I probably have like 15 minutes of footage that I could throw onto a video. I could do that. And, and I thought about that. And I also thought, instead of having to deal with all the different conditions and getting the right sound and the right, making sure your cameras worked all the time, doing the podcast is almost a little bit better, just because then I actually get the time to actually explain what I'm doing out there. And I know I have been kind of slacking on the whole videoing while I'm out there, but it's just because I've been really focusing in on doing the tournaments and really focusing on trying to actually get better at these tournaments and actually trying to adapt more when I'm in these tournaments, rather than just fun fishing and, oh, look at me, I'm catching 1s and 2-pound bass, and every once in a while I'll catch 3-pound bass. This way it kind of promotes me to try to catch bigger fish, because especially in these challenge series, you have to be averaging, like, if you want to get first place, you have to get 90 inches or more, like, to even be in the running for first place. That's not even just saying getting first place, because this month the first place he got some inches this time. Let's see, let me log into Tourney X real quick. I really like this catch photo release sort of system. It's been really kind of nice. But let's see, let's go. My dashboard. Let's view standings. Past tournaments. August. Okay, so first place got 100 inches and a quarter. 100 and a quarter inches. Wow. That's substantial. I mean, his biggest fish, and this was first place went out to Troy Caldwell. Congratulations. And look, Joe Bailey's up in number 2. I think he won last month's tournament, if I believe. Let me go back. Let's go to July. Yeah, Joe Bailey won last month's tournament, and he won last month's tournament with 97 3/4. So this month, see, how do you do? 98. He upgraded just slightly. He upgraded by 1/4 of an inch. Still highly impressive. Highly impressive. But yeah, first place, 20 inches and 3/4 was his big fish. The smallest fish was 19 3/4. And he also, the other, I mean, he just wrecked him. Nothing smaller than 19 3/4 and just absolutely wrecked him. But I ended up getting 6th place. Now, when I first started out this month, it was a struggle. I ended up trying to fish Fellows Lake, and I just kind of figured out a little bit, and after actually looking at Google Maps Pro and actually using the timeline in order to go back, I actually see why the fish are actually kind of located where they are. I mean, the water's actually kind of at a higher pool than normal, so they're kind of sitting at the backs of these pockets, and that's where I started catching these fish. Was in the back of a pocket, right at the creek mouth, pretty much right at the creek mouth, and there's this lay down, and I pitch in there with my underspin, and it was a weedless underspin. It's one of the owner flashy swimmers, probably one of my favorite underspins out there. Like my second favorite, it's actually the Berkeley Fusion. It's or the Berkeley underspin. It's like a little swim bait thing, but that one's an open hook. And if you're fishing a lot of wood, and you're fishing a lot of laydowns, and you're fishing a whole bunch of other stuff, you kind of want to just make sure that you're not getting hung up all the time. Because if you're getting hung up all the time, you're spooking fish by going in there and getting hung. So the places that you would be catching fish, you're not, because you're getting hung up. So there's kind of a catch-22. Your hookup ratio is going to be much better, but your the amount that you're going to hook into stuff is also higher. So that's kind of something to take into account. Now, whenever it comes down to the owner flashy swimmer, whenever I'm fishing that, and I usually fish them with a like 3.5-inch Strike King Rage swimmer. I usually go with something like that, or like a Kitech, just basically your swim bait, whatever your preference is on swim baits, but it's usually like a 3.5, 3 3/4, something like that. But that is usually my go-to whenever it comes down to fishing cover. And so I pitch this in there, and this bass just rails it. And I set the hook, and I thought I had her. But when it came up and spit the hook out, because, I mean, for one thing, it didn't even have the hook in it. I don't know how this happened. Like, when it came up and it opens its mouth. Let's say this, I know this is a chatterbait. I don't actually have my swim bait here. But basically, the hook point, it had it like this. So the hook was still in the bait, but it was just holding on to it. So I don't know how, when I set the hook, because I set it hard. When I set the hook, I tend to not, be gentle about it. Just especially since this is a tech-exposed rig, it's also something that's, you're going to have to set the hook in order to get the hook through the plastic. So I don't necessarily I don't just lean into it. I do the whole pop the hip and just hip into it. I try to put my whole body weight into it, not trying to back up, but just kind of turn it, to really just set that hook in there. Because I believe when you set the hook that you don't need to do this like grand motion. It just needs to be hard and stiff, Now, with something like an open hook, you just kind of need to lean into them. You just need to make sure that you do kind of set the hook a little bit. You can usually do like some sort of reel set or something like that. Carolina rig, you want to make sure you're doing a sweeping hook set to the side. And also with like Texas rigs, whenever you're using a heavier weight, I like to reel down into them first and then set the hook. Kind of load up that rod first and then set the hook, which is usually the way I like to go. I usually don't try to set it on a slack line just because I notice when I set it on a slack line, I tend to blow out the fish's mouth, and I have a pretty terrible hookup ratio when I do it like that. But if I reel down to them first, then I can just, bam, just hook them hard, and, then the fight's on. And it's all about getting that fish into the boat. But I ended up getting 6th place in this tournament, and it started out pretty rough. Like I said, I lost that big one. That was probably like 4 or 5 pounds. And that day, I ended up losing most of the fish that day. I think I lost them all. I don't think I actually caught one. But one of the things that I did kind of recognize, though, was that I was getting bit. So I was doing something right. And so the next day, I ended up going back out there, but I didn't go back to the same spot. I wanted to go check out this other spot. And I ended up catching like a 13 and a half or 13 and a quarter, something like that. It was a small bass, but that was it. That was the only one I was actually able to put into the boat. And that was the only bite that I actually got that day. So, I mean, as far as like Fellows Lake is concerned, for me, it's fishing kind of tough, but it's just like, I think partially it's just because, I'm not used to it. I'm not used to fishing that lake. I don't know where all the little ins and outs and all the little places where bass hide. And it's also a deeper lake. So I'm not really used to fishing deep structures and that sort of stuff. And whenever you're in a kayak that doesn't have a pedal drive or a trolling motor onto it, it's kind of hard to keep boat position. You have to anchor off almost constantly, or be in a spot to where there's little to no wind. That's one of the reasons why I do like fishing the James River, because since it's a river, you get the added protection of it being kind of sunken into, where the river is. So it kind of creates a windbreak. As long as the wind's not traveling straight up that river, usually you're pretty good. And, since it does, wind back and forth, there are places to where you do get a fairly decent amount of wind. But also, since it's a river system, there's usually a lot of current, so the fish are usually active, most of the times of the year. But I just kind of find that fishing that like river, I've really been able to like hone in and just like zero in on where the fish are, because for me, they're in this like one sort of stretch of the river. They're not in all of the places. They're not everywhere. They're in specific spots. But the specific spot that they're in, there's a lot of shad, and there's a great deal of bait. Just all these huge bait balls just moving around. You can see them on the surface, and occasionally they'll start blowing up on them. And I ended up, going up the river and finding that there was a whole bunch of bass just chasing these shad. So I started targeting those bass that were actually chasing the shad. But the problem is all the bass that were chasing the shad were all these like little 13, like 12 inch, almost 13, stuff that I wasn't willing to put onto the leaderboard. I mean, it was fun, don't get me wrong. Like, as far as like fishing goes, it was a great day, because I mean, you're talking about chasing bass that are chasing shad. They're blowing up, and you're having to like paddle over there as quick as possible, toss your bait in there. A lot of the times, I would be just within casting distance, and that's usually how I ended up catching them, is just by bringing my bait through and then popping it right as it got to the school, causing the school to disperse, and then the bass would come up, grab my bait. It was pretty fun, but it wasn't producing any sort of like number. Well, it's producing numbers, not inches, and I needed inches and not numbers, because with a month-long tournament, you don't really need to worry about catching a limit. You're probably going to catch a limit, as long as you go out and fish for a couple days. If you only have one day a week, that's 3 days. So you have at least 3 days out of the month to be able to put a limit into the boat, which you can do that. I mean, that's something that you can do. If you only have one day, that kind of sucks. But, it is what it is, and sometimes work and responsibilities have to come first, and you don't actually get to go out as much as somebody else does. But I was actually able to go out a few different times this month, and I started really being able to hone in on. And where it really kind of started to set in was I started, like, there's a certain place that I like to fish, but I can't get to it right now. The only way to get to it is if you go around this, like, sort of peninsula, and there's a small little cut to where whenever the water gets high, it'll actually run through there. But when the water's just normal, you actually have to portage through. And one of the things is I kind of want to get some wheels, because I don't want to just put deep scratches into my kayak just by, dragging it over a whole bunch of rocks and stuff like that. And, I don't have, like, the most expensive kayak to where it's actually really abrasion resistant. It's just, an Ascend kayak. It's just, it's not a bad kayak for what it is. If you wanted something to where it's affordable, it's fairly durable, you can stand and fish, you can, I mean, I've had no problems landing fish in this kayak. I've had no problems, standing up and fishing. I've set the hook standing. I've yet to fall out of the kayak. I've had to take a seat once or twice. I have had to do that to where, you start to get unbalanced and then you sit down. One of them was on a hook set, but I think that was kind of my fault. I was fishing, and I was fishing straight into where I was casting. And so when I set the hook, and it was with a frog, so with a frog, you really got to set the hook. And I set the hook hard, and when I did, the kayak went forward while I was kind of shifting backwards, which I felt that shift, and when I did, I corrected it. But when I corrected it, I noticed that I was going to go over the front. So then I corrected it again and just sat down. So I just sat my butt right down in the seat and just bloosh. I ended up catching the fish that I set the hook on. It wasn't very big. Luckily, like whenever I actually hooked into it, set the hook, I actually hooked into it. But I mean, it wasn't that big. It was like a little 12-inch bass. I mean, it wasn't very big. But, I nearly fell out. But that's like really the only time that I've really had any sort of issues with, any sort of stability. But I think that might have happened with any sort of kayak, just because the way I was positioned with the kayak. If I was off on an angle, it would have been much easier to set the hook and not fall out, because it would have had to turn the kayak and not just pull it straight forward. Because the kayak's meant to go straight forward, It's a little bit harder to turn. There's more resistance in the water when the kayak actually has to turn. So, and also when it turns, it's not necessarily moving towards it. It's more turning it. Whereas when I set the hook here, it started moving. So, but that I digress. Back to the tournament. So, I ended up catching, like, I had a 13.5-inch bass on here, which I ended up calling him out. So, that's kind of a blurry picture. Some of these are kind of blurry. But, so, whenever I was out there fishing, I started figuring out that where I should be fishing is around these big balls of shad, because there's going to be stuff feeding on those shad, and there's also going to be stuff eating the things that are feeding on those shad. There's also going to be, big stuff that do feed on those shad, but they're just going to kind of sit and wait in structure and other places like that. And so I started fishing around the shad, and not not specifically fishing the shad balls themselves. And I think that's what really kind of led me to start finding bigger bass, was fishing the structures around those shad balls. And most of the places that I was fishing and catching the big fish were off these kind of like rock ledges. But it was really shallow water that I would end up catching them in. Like, I think it might have been, yeah, so I caught this one. It was probably about 5 pounds, but it was only like 17 and a half inches. It was just fat. It was a really fat bass. But I ended up chucking behind me and just kind of slow rolling it. And I sped it up in order to bring it back to the bank. Well, not bank. I was in my kayak. I sped it up. And I ended up, as soon as I started speeding it up, it was like a couple cranks, and all of a sudden that thing just loads up. I'm like, oh, at first I thought I snagged into something. But I ended up, it ended up being a fish, because when I kind of like, when it bowed over, I was like, oh, that's not a, I was thinking, oh, well, that's probably a tree or a limb or something. Just the way that it kind of just loaded up. Because usually, I find that those underspins, they tend to attack it. I mean, it's usually not a very subtle bite. But this one was just kind of subtle. And whenever I kind of reeled into it and just kind of pulled it, I started feeling the head shakes. I'm like, oh, that's a bass. Oh, that's a fish. And then it came up, and I'm like, oh, that's a really good fish. And I fought it for a little bit right next to the boat. And I was actually able to bring it in, lip it, and get a photo. And that was my first 17. That was my first plus like 17 and a half inch fish, actually, of these tournaments, which is pretty cool. And the second one that I caught that was 17 and a half inches was, I was fishing. There was like a tree that kind of came out into the water, and right before it, there was like a bush. So you have this tree that's coming out in the water, and you have this bush right here. So it kind of made this little like U spot right here up against the bank, and it was all shaded. And I was like, there's got to be a bass just sitting in there. So I ended up pitching up in there, and sure enough, bam, this thing just, and I saw it just kind of come up and boil on it. Because I cast it up pretty, like, shallow, and I was just going to bring it off. But after casting up in there, bam, it just smoked it. Set the hook. Oh, I could tell I had a good one on. It was fighting for a bit. Netted it. Boom. 17 and a half inches right there. So far, this has been the best tournament that I have done yet. And something else I've really figured out is, at first I was just using black and blue, like that black and blue, or like June bug or something like that, or like a pearl white, something like that. But one of the things that I decided that I was going to do is, I had some chartreuse dye, and I went ahead and dyed the tips on this Guggenbait's trench hog. And I dyed the tips because it was black and blue, and then had the chartreuse ends. That really, I guess, is more of a representation of like a bluegill. And there's lots of bluegill into that river system. So that, I think, was the reason why I started getting those bigger bites, is by just dyeing the tips. So it was a little bit more accurate representation of what a bluegill would be, and that's probably what it was foraging on. So, and I think, like, those two things, fishing the structures around the bait balls, and then fishing something that was matching the hatch, something that was bluegill and not shad. Because I think these bigger bass, they're probably not feeding on the shad, because the shad are pretty small. So you have smaller bass going after these balls of shad, because you're talking like these things have to be only like a couple inches long. So most of them are probably not feeding on shad. They're probably feeding on bluegill that are feeding onto the shad. So anytime those bait balls come around, bluegill will probably come up and, wolf them down. And then probably these bigger bass will come up and wolf down those bluegill. That's pretty reasonable to kind of make that. When I say it's pretty reasonable, like it's an easy connection. One feeds on the other, and the other feeds. You got this whole little cycle. The bait fish are like the little balls of shad are eating bugs and algae and whatever they're feeding on at that point in time. Just small little microscopic stuff or small little things, organisms, and they're probably feeding on those pretty consistently. But then you have the bluegill and probably crappie, because I know there's crappie in there. I've caught crappie into that lake. So if they're in the lake, they're probably in the river. So those are probably feeding onto the balls of shad plus smaller bass. And then your bigger bass are going to be feeding on your bluegill, crappie, and small bass. So in order to target the bigger bass, you actually have to not mimic the smallest animal or the animal that's on the low end of the food chain. I'm actually using a imitation of something that's further up the food chain in order to get to that big bass. So that was kind of like my thought process and the logic behind what I was doing. But this tournament, like when I got sixth place, I was actually really kind of happy. I was hoping to get either fifth or into the top five, but I wasn't able to. The guy ahead of me, PK Clark, he came in with 85 and 3/4. I had 78 and 3/4. So, I mean, we're talking that's a few inches that's a few inches that I would have to make up. See, I would have, in order to like actually be able to get fifth, I would have had to upgrade everything. Every single one of my fish I would have had to upgrade. The smallest fish he had was 16 1/4, and the biggest one was 18 1/2. He had 2 18s and 3 16s. And it's just, yeah, I would have had to upgrade everything in order to compete with that. I would have had to, like, my smallest fish would have had to be my biggest fish. That's really what it comes down to, is I would have had to have my 2 17s being the smallest fish on there. So, I mean, but the next dude up from him had 5 inches on him, which he would have had to upgrade everything that he had. So, like, for him to be able to compete, he would have had to got rid of all 3 of his 16s and upgrade all those to 18s in order to beat this guy. So, I mean, it kind of, even then it doesn't really level out. Like, 4th and 3rd had 3 inches between them. 3rd and 2nd, he had 4 1/4. 4 1/4 inches on him. And then between first and second was actually fairly close. When I say fairly close, I mean, second place was Joe Bailey, and he had 98 inches, and he was, 2 inches and 1/4 away from, like, he would have had to have 2.5 inches in order to get first place. So, I mean, that's fairly close. I mean, it's not neck and neck. Like, I think the 7th and 8th place guys had a much closer race between the two of them. 8th place had 73 1/4, and 7th place had 73 3/4. So, that was actually probably the closest anybody else had gotten. And let's see. Oh, I actually had a big bass on one of those days. That's cool. I haven't actually ever been on the daily big fish board before. See, it just pays to go out and... Oh, that wasn't even... See, I went out on the 21st and I caught a 17 and a half. See, that wasn't even then. That was a different day. But, yeah. I mean, overall, some pretty decent bags. And let's see what my average is for this month. I like figuring out the averages. So let's see, 78 3/4. Divide that by 5. So my average length for this month was 15 3/4, which is a huge upgrade from the month before. Because let's see, the month before, I think I had like 15 and... Let's see. I got 9th last month. That's not bad. Let's see. I had 73 3/4. A whole 5 inches more this month. Divide that by 5. Oop, no, not 8. 5. 14 3/4. So 15 3/4 this month, 14 3/4 last month. So a whole inch difference. That would be the so I mean, so I'm steadily, getting better at these tournaments. It's just you just gotta grind through them. You gotta figure it out. You gotta figure out where the big bass are going to be hanging out. You can't. I mean, going out and just junk fishing isn't necessarily a good option. You got to figure out where all the big ones are sitting around and hanging around. And they were all off of one little stretch. They really didn't have too much. I mean, I really caught them all in the same area. Like, as soon as I started venturing out of that area, I stopped catching bass. So it was all in that one little area, and I think that's just like a summertime haunt for a lot of fish, because it's near the mouth of the lake, but it's not really near the mouth. But where that is, that section of river, it doesn't seem like it gets a lot of wind. It's nice and protected. It's usually, there's some nice shade spots there. There's a pretty decent, like, shallow area on one side, and there's a really kind of steep, rock face on the other side. I don't think it's, like, super deep. I think it's only, like, maybe 15 feet, something like that, 15, 20 foot. It's, not the deepest in the world, but, it drops off pretty decently right there. So, and since it's a river system, you have constant current, and here's another thing. That little stretch is in between the mouth of the James and Springfield Lake, and it's also in between the intersection to where the mouth of, I can't remember what creek it is, but there's a creek that runs through the nature center that's right there, and it dumps out right before that little stretch. So you got you have a river and a creek that's converging at that spot. Then you have below that is the mouth of the lake. So I think that's just a natural place for them to actually hang out during the summertime because, well, for one thing, there's bait everywhere. I mean, there was just nothing but shad balls just all over that spot. But just fishing those shade spots, fishing that structure, fishing those little cuts into the rock to where it just kind of creates a little current break. fishing those current breaks and stuff like that. That really changed the game for this month. And that's probably what led to my success on this month. Let's see. Now, see, last month, if I would have gotten 78 inches, I wouldn't have gotten the same place. I would actually have been, I would probably only have been in 8th place. I would only have moved up one spot. So, I mean, that wouldn't have done too much for last month if I would have had the same fish that I had this month. But, it is what it is. But I'm actually really happy with this last month. I'm really happy with how I actually where I actually placed and figuring out where these bigger fish are. Now, if I hadn't have lost a couple of those fish, I think I would have done a little bit better. But even then, it's just like I had one fish that I took a picture of it and it was in low light and it ended up being too blurry and I couldn't use it. So that would have been a 15-inch fish, but that would have only upgraded me a little, I think only to like 79 and a half. I think that's as high as I would have been if I would have had that photo. If I would have caught if I would have had that big bass at the beginning of the month, I think I might have broken 80, but that still wouldn't have changed my place. So overall, I think I did fairly well. I just need to make sure that whenever I go back out there, that I'm actually continually to, figure these fish out, continually to, try to put big bass into the boat and into the kayak. But yeah, and it's just one little stretch. It wasn't huge. I mean, it's a fairly decent stretch of water, but as far as as far as the whole area that I actually could have gone to, it was, not that large of an area, really. That's wild. I'm looking at a satellite photo, and I think there's it looks like rainwater that is rushing down this river system here, because I can actually see like the breaks where the mud lines are, and you can actually see onto the satellite before the mud has like that muddy rain has pushed through the river. It took a picture. It's kind of interesting. Now those could be from like 2 different bays, but I really don't know if they are. But it's just kind of interesting because you kind of have this like, clear water, and it kind of goes into this muddy-ish water, and then you got mud, just straight yoo-hoo. But yeah, it was an interesting month. Like I said, I'm pretty happy with my performance on this month. I wish I would have gotten actually more bass or bigger bass and maybe figured out what I figured out now earlier. But I think moving into the next month, I don't know if I want to continue fishing in on Springfield Lake, or maybe trying to go to Fellows Lake a little bit more and figuring that out. Because I did find a couple areas with using the Google Maps Pro that I think might be pretty decent. But, you never know until you actually get out there and try. I just know that one of the things I do want to do is to make sure that when I go out to Fellows Lake, because one of the places I was looking at is this one spot that I actually caught some fish. There's two places on Fellows Lake that I want to check out. For one thing, I'm going to bring up the historical tool. Let's see, 2011. Yeah. See, in 2011, there was actually fairly low water. We had a pretty extensive drought season that year. So there was a lot of low water. But whenever I was looking at this and looking at the satellite image, and if we zoom in quite a bit, about 40 feet off of the bank. At first I thought they were just kind of like, sort of like image discrepancies or whatever you want to call it. But at first I thought it was like, maybe some sort of like blemish or something that wasn't, on the film. But I noticed it was like kind of in a line on the shore. I'm pretty sure what these are stumps. I'm pretty sure these are stumps. Maybe. I don't know really what they are. I just know, looking at a satellite image, there's a whole bunch of like little dark spots that are about 40 feet off of the current shoreline where the water is. That, and also there's another spot that I do want to check out. And basically there's a little cut, and at the front of the cut there's actually a hump that goes from one bank to the other. So it kind of creates this like high spot that's right at the beginning of the cut, and I want to go check that out too. I think crawling a worm over that, or like a jig or something over that, wouldn't be too bad of an idea. Also, that whole like stump line right at the beginning of this cove, because I mean it's I can see it onto the satellite image, and I think there's probably going to be bass that are probably staging right through there, especially during the summertime, because that's pretty close to the main lake right there. That's almost like a point. That's right off of a point. So you have the main lake point, and the thing is there's buoys like right there, right after that cove. There's buoys for the dam that you can't go across, which kind of sucks. I get it. You don't want people getting too close to the dam and getting sucked over and all that fun stuff. But man, there's a cove back there that I wouldn't mind checking out. There's a couple little cuts that I wouldn't mind checking out, but oh well, what are you gonna do? Oh, I didn't see that. Oh, there's a submerged thing. I'm seeing something, some sort of, it looks like maybe a house foundation. Could possibly be a house foundation. It's a big square thing in the water. Possibly. I don't know. I don't know what that is. But I definitely want to go check that out now. Now after seeing that, there's a couple of rock transitions right there, to where it looks like it goes from pea gravel to chunk rock. I think I need to go over here and check it out, because I'm seeing some decent rock transitions. That might be a stump there. I think I found out where I'm going to be going fishing. Yep. Oh, well. We'll have to check that out. Hopefully that'll be the next month's tournament. So I'm going to go ahead and just wrap this dude up because, for one thing, I do have to go to work, which is fun. Fun things to do, I guess. I'd rather go fishing. I'd rather just call out and just be like, hey, I'm going fishing. But, you know, you got to go to work. Got to do that. Got to make a paycheck. Got to make a living. Can't do the fishing stuff. Can't do the podcast without it. That's for sure. But hopefully this next month, I'm gonna try to fish. I'm gonna try to fish Fellows Lake a little bit more. Try to be try to figure that thing out. There's a couple places on there that I do want to go fishing and to check out. Let's see. Yeah, it looks like next week. That weekend, I'll probably end up going out to Fellows Lake that next weekend, just to kind of do a little bit of pre-fishing. Maybe see if I can't catch something on the stumps or something like that. We'll figure it out. But hopefully next month, do a little bit better. I'm going to try to break 80. That's my goal. Try to break 80. I got close this time. Just an inch and a quarter away. So that's all I need is an inch and a quarter or more next month instead, compared to this month. So, yeah, I say let's go for it. Let's go out there and kick some bass. Yeah, that's going to be fun. So, I've been, enjoying this stuff, and I've been having a great time, doing all these podcasts and trying to break down some of the tournaments that I'm doing, trying to break down some of the things that I've been fishing, and trying to bring a little bit of information, maybe some entertainment along with it. More probably entertainment than information, because as far as like the information goes, hopefully there is some usable information in here for you guys and gals, because you guys are also out there fishing too. But yeah, I hope this has been fun and entertaining. And if you guys have any questions about fishing or anything about kayaks or anything like what type of baits I'm using, anything like that, go ahead and leave that down in the comment section below. And go ahead and like, subscribe, and go ahead and share this video. Sharing this video with your friends, family, people that you may not like. Give that video to them. Be like, here, torture yourself with this guy's, content. Here you go. I don't like you. Watch this. But, yeah, so you guys have a great day. I'm going to have a great day. And I'll see you out on the water. Peace.